Gather round while I sing you of Werner von Braun, a man whose allegiance is ruled by expedience. Call him a Nazi, he won't even frown. Nazi schmatzi, says Werner von Braun.
I think that Captain America, the First Avenger, is an entertaining movie. For a long time, Cap and Iron Man were my two favorite heroes in the MCU, though I lean more towards Spider-Man and the Guardians of the Galaxy these days. I still enjoy Cap's movies, though. I love the diesel punk aesthetic that Hydra offers. They're entertaining villains. Punching Hitler in the face is there thematically, if not literally, and as much as it builds up America as a great nation, it offers some thematic criticism of its traditional modes of operation, and portrays its national propaganda as annoying.
Arrogance may not be a uniquely American trait, but I must say you do it better than anyone.
That said, there are major flaws that, try as I might, I have not been able to look past. I recently included this film in an anti-Nazi marathon, along with Inglourious Basterds, Jojo Rabbit, To Be or Not to Be, The Guns of Navarone, and even Porco Rosso for its anti-Italian fascist content. However, this one felt out of place. It isn't really that anti-Nazi, or even anti-fascist. Not really. As much as the Nazis are indicated to be people America is fighting against at the time, they aren't really the antagonists. Red Skull and Hydra are the baddies at the heart of the film, and as much as they are a derivative of Nazism, as much as they evoke ideas surrounding Nazism, what they stand for isn't really fascist. If you listen to what Red Skull actually says, he actually sounds like an anarchist.
Wear a flag on your chest and think you fight a battle of nations. I have seen the future, Captain. There are no flags.
If a viewer has Nazi sympathies, they can reasonably watch the film and come away thinking that Captain America would stand up for their people against anti-fascists. And that is a major problem. If you look at the previous Captain America film from 1990, unrelated to Disney, and notably the only other Captain America adaptation at least trying to be comics accurate, they do not shy away from the Nazi element at all. It's plausible to me that some Disney executive was concerned about offending fascists, and maybe we should talk about that. Even if I am off base with this speculation, the fact that the film we have is consistent with it is concerning. While I do think it's reductive to say that the MCU is solely children's media, the role of the children's market should not be discounted when analyzing the films. It's relevant when considering why the heroes change costumes so much, to sell more toys, and it's relevant to consider what the films might be saying to their child consumers. If nothing else, knowing what parents would allow to be shown to their children tells us something about modern American culture, but I'm also concerned about what children might be learning, internalizing, and taking out into the world. The main themes in the movie are superficially wholesome. Bullies are bad. People who stand up to bullies are good, and it's what's inside that counts. There are also a lot of smaller ideas that are projected to the viewers that are somewhat questionable. Even the anti-bully theme is inadequate to truly address the horrors of Nazism, and leaves far too much room for sympathizing with Nazis who may be one day bullied themselves. Far from a one-off problem, this inadequacy with discussing Nazism is a trend throughout Disney's depictions of it since World War II, and may well stem from an underlying fascist sentiment at the House of Mouse. Team America!
Fuck yeah! Coming again to save the motherfucking day, yeah!
Though the propaganda is cheesy and there are bad actors or bullies indicated to have positions of power, the notion of America being great is inescapable. Fighting a war for America is great. Serving the war effort is great. What the war actually is doesn't matter. Just something about standing up to bullies. America is positioned as the David before Goliath, the weakling standing up to the bully, and there is no nuance presented to add any shades of gray. American racism doesn't exist in this universe, so there's no comparison between 1942 America and Germany, even though there totally were similarities in the real world, and there are no systemic problems indicated to be at home. Segregation doesn't exist in this world. White and black theatergoers sit in the same area. They walk down the same streets. They're allowed to be comrades on the battlefield and fight in the same units. So when white people are overrepresented in the armed forces because of casting racism, it's just implied that more white people are patriots. And when the white Texan guy is rude to the Asian guy, it has nothing to do with propaganda painting Asian people as subhuman monsters, or America sending its own citizens to concentration camps on basis of race. It's just this one guy being rude, and then getting over his rudeness. People make a lot out of Steve being just a kid from Brooklyn, with the implication of poverty giving him perspective, but that theme isn't explored in the film itself. To people unfamiliar with Brooklyn's reputation, like most of the children watching, there's nothing to even indicate that it's an impoverished neighborhood. The film explains what fondue is, but Steve's humble beginnings are allowed to just be about his physical form and understanding how bullies are harmful from the perspective of someone who has been bullied. This bullying is depicted in the simplest way with no themes of classism attached, just a random strong guy attacking a weak guy. While a feminist struggle is sort of depicted as present in the 40s, it's also so cleaned up that it might as well not be there. Agent Peggy Carter is exceptional, a wacky superhero, and the sexy dancers aren't portrayed as products of sexism so much as fun trends in entertainment that have always existed. It's more or less just a 1940s themed version of 2010's Iron Man 2 depictions of Black Widow and the Ironettes. Peggy's encounter with rude men isn't indicated to be part of an overarching trend of sexism and its opposition throughout the Western world. It's highly individualized. Men act like bullies. She stands up to bullies. Steve likes her because he also stands up to bullies. And together they stand up to bullies on a larger scale. The Allies rule. The Axis powers drool. Not that we're ever told what the Axis is. The term Axis is only used once in the song, during a part with a lot of distracting visuals and instrumentals. You really have to pay attention to know the lyrics. As much as the film presents itself as about World War II, it doesn't care to define the enemy or the conflict at hand. Who were the Nazis? I first learned about the Nazis when my father showed me Life is Beautiful, a darkly comedic film about the Holocaust. Using it as an instructive aid, he explained what systemic anti-Semitism looked like, though he didn't use that term, what it meant for people shipped off to concentration camps, and how there were these people who were as human as anyone, into art, humor, and riddles, who could do horrible things, because fear convinced them to rally around bigotry. That was my introduction to the Nazis. However, for most children in America, their introduction to Nazis probably comes from Captain America: The First Avenger. So, what does the film say about them? Well, they were bullies. They were German. Berlin, where many of them came from, was important to them. They did something called goose-stepping, left undefined.
Who is it?
Goons.
Who?
Hired goons.
Goons. You know, like bullies. These goons did something bad to some people in Germany, which they metaphorically invaded first. And not all Germans were bad like them. There was a Nazi leader named Hitler who was important to them. He looked something like this. And it's reasonable to be sympathetic to them, to show them basic humanity, because at the end of the day, the point is about opposing bullies. And even Nazi goons can be bullied by other people. Like the Red Skull, who wants to defeat every country to institute anarchism or something. Yeah, that's not good. The crimes of Nazism and their racial hatred should be their defining details. They aren't just schoolyard bullies. Reducing them to that, even in the context of a war, makes them far more sympathetic than they should be. The guy who beats up Steve in the alley is a jerk, but you would try to save him from the Red Skull. That is how Arnim Zola, a literal Nazi, coerced into serving Hydra at the expense of other Nazis, is treated in the film. He's kind of a jerk, but you also kind of root for him, and accept his defection into America as the acquisition of a new, powerful ally. A lot like the real world, Werner von Braun. a Nazi who designed rockets fired into London, who was later recruited by America to design rockets for NASA and was made the host of a Disney show. Funny how that works.
Some have harsh words for this man of renown, but some think our attitude should be one of gratitude, like the widows and cripples in old London town, who owe their large pensions to Werner von Braun.
I'm more relaxed than most people when it comes to depicting Nazis as sympathetic. I mean, we're all human. Hitler's father was abusive. Himmler was bullied at school. However, the horror of Nazism must be retained. The sympathetic traits add nuance. They shouldn't detract from the monstrosity of the subject. First Avenger doesn't define them right. It depicts Nazi war crimes solely through the metaphor of Hydra, indicated to be its own thing, and reduces Nazis to bullies that can be bullied by bigger bullies. There's no horror to it. When they add sympathetic traits, it doesn't add nuance to monsters. It makes them look like half-decent human beings. By implication, Cap can find it in his heart to support these guys if they were ever to be bullied themselves.
Do you want to kill Nazis?
I don't want to kill anyone. I don't like bullies.
Why the hell isn't anti-Semitism in this movie? Erskine, an Einstein figure, is implied to be a Jewish refugee from Nazi Germany, much as Einstein was, but it's not made clear to an ignorant child audience. He references his people being antagonized by Nazis, but he doesn't explicitly say the Jewish people or how this antagonism actually worked. Going off of what the movie tells us, he is a German defector who considers the Nazis to be bullies, who bullied good Germans like him.
Where are you from?
Queens. Before that, Germany. Is this troubleshoot?
By erasing the conflict between Jews and Nazis, Zola is later allowed into this nebulous category of good Germans who can defect and join America. Cap fake punches fake Hitler, and all the children read a fictionalized version of that, and those kids presumably understand who Hitler is, but it's not deemed important enough that the kids watching the movie know who Hitler is. Hitler's role as a demagogue isn't discussed or even implied. He's the German leader, but his significance doesn't translate through the narrative. No one hails him throughout the whole movie. Isn't that weird? Red Skull takes his place as bad guy leader who talks about superior men, and Hydra does the Hail Hydra bit that's evocative of Heil Hitler, but Hitler himself and the Nazi relationship to him aren't important. You know, in the World War II movie. When the Captain America comics first came out in 1940, 2 years before Hitler declared war on the US, it was an overt Jewish message encouraging America to get with the program and fight Nazis. Like the children in the movie, everyone knew what Nazis were then. The German-American Bund, the American branch of Nazism, was going strong. The American government was hesitant about joining the war and was concerned about offending Germany and getting roped into it, so they weren't condemning the rampant anti-Semitism in the country and abroad. The comic came out in this climate as a subversive stand against anti-Semitism. Everyone knew what it meant for a guy called Captain America to punch Hitler, and it was powerful. The American Nazi contingent hated it, sent angry letters, and some even showed up in person to threaten violence on the creators, who stood their ground and continued to produce comics to drum up support for the war. It's a powerful, Jewish, anti-Nazi story. The 1990 adaptation seemingly understood this context and kept the villains as Nazis.
Congratulations. Heil Hitler! Who the hell are you?
The first of many, many.
Hydra.
The first Avenger has Nazis in it, but it's ultimately not an anti-Nazi story. It's an anti-bully story. The bully theme is infantile. It doesn't properly capture the conflict and makes literal criminals against humanity into mean but fundamentally respectable people. If you're not committed to depicting the horror of Nazism, don't put Nazis in your movie. The criminals against humanity featured in the movie wear a Nazi-inspired aesthetic, but are ultimately a different organization that themselves oppress Nazis and represent a different political agenda. They can be hated without hating Nazis. In fact, They can be hated while liking Nazis. That is a major problem. What is Hydra? Hydra is not well defined in the movie. It has similarities to Nazism, but has a different agenda. It is Red Skull's private army, and a cult that encourages its members to hail it like Hitler pushed his followers to do, which is a detail only apparent to adults with pre-existing knowledge of Nazism and German culture. It is a conspiracy attempting to devastate the world and eliminate every nation to put into place a new hierarchy with Red Skull at the top and Cap if he were interested in joining him, out of the belief that being physically superhuman grants them the right to rule. They wear dark leather clothing with points of red like SS uniforms. Not that we know who these people are. Retain Nazi Reichsadler, Imperial Eagle, imagery without swastikas. And Red Skull has an interest in the occult like Hydra did, and drives a Mercedes like the Nazi High Command, but are fundamentally different guys using a different symbol.
The twisted logic that they teach you when you sign up to be a Nazi.
Stop, wait. I'm not a Nazi.
The Red Skull, founder of Hydra, was a big fat frickin' Nazi.
That has nothing to do with today.
They aren't Nazis. They're a metaphor for Nazis. There is a lot of ambiguity with Hydra. That allows the metaphor to get distorted. The text of the movie suggests that Red Skull is an anarchist. He is an evil anarchist who opposes America and Nazi Germany, and Captain America stands up to him on behalf of America and nations in general. There is room for viewing Hydra as an anti-fascist organization, and for the film's ultimate message to be that anti-fascists are bullies threatening likable nationalists, both American and otherwise. Fascist parents could show this movie to their children and have it reinforce their teaching, because it doesn't actually subvert it at any point. It's like a multi-purpose dog whistle. It could reasonably signal an anti-fascist message to those primed to interpret it that way, and simultaneously signal a pro-fascist message to fascists. In addition to resembling Nazis, Hydra also resembles the anti-Semitic notion of a cabal of evil Jews seeking world domination. Zola thinks that Hydra are Nazis, but they stab the Germans in the back and try to take over the world, leading to him ultimately joining the good guys.
It's the Krusty Comedy Classic.
It's great to be back at the Apollo Theater and... KKK, that's not good.
Now I'm sure this wasn't intentional on the part of the people who wrote the Nazi betrayal scene. Look at this guy with the Hitler mustache. I'm sure some people thought he was symbolic of Hitler himself, with Red Skull betraying him, but I think he looks more like Ernst Röhm.
And what in Sam Hill is an Ernst Röhm?
Ernst Röhm! Prominent Nazi and leader of the Brown Shirts, until Hitler had him killed in 1934, in his consolidation of power, the Night of the Long Knives.
You're making that up.
I'm telling you, he's a real guy! Anyway, I think these three Nazis are symbolic of Hitler's rivals who he had killed to consolidate his power. Red Skull killing them positions him as a Hitler figure. The problem is, he isn't literally Hitler. He's a guy with an anarchist cult. The text of the movie disassociates him from Nazism and onto anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. If Erskine is read as Jewish, though he certainly doesn't have to be, the anti-Semitic rationale that it's not all Jews, it's international Jewry, can be applied to absolve him. After all, he does make Captain America to help fight Hydra. Red Skull talks about superior people, but does so as a subversive, not following Nazi doctrine, can be associated with the anti-Semitic misreading of Jews as God's chosen people, and bears a non-white appearance contrasted with Cap's.
You don't have one of those, do you?
I no longer reflect his image of Aryan perfection.
Even their emblem, the octopus with a human head, was frequently used by Nazi propagandists and other people to depict this Jewish conspiracy. Now technically, Jewish guy Stan Lee assigned this emblem to Hydra himself back in the 60s, when it was just these guys in tacky jumpsuits running around harassing white Nick Fury, when it was just a generic criminal organization unconnected to the Red Skull and Nazis. However, despite Stan's stance framing him as a perfect Jewish creative, he was a flawed human being, drawing on popular motifs regardless of problematic content. He was a product of his time, sexist, racist, homophobic, and used existing mainstream shorthand for evildoers that sometimes had anti-Semitic subtext. Both the octopus and various long-nosed villains resembling Jewish caricatures. He wasn't perfect. He was a guy. The movie didn't have to include anything from the comics. They chose how to compose the elements, and they came up with this. Something that could be a metaphor for Nazism or for a Jewish cabal, depending on how one is apt to interpret this kind of element. To be clear, I don't think that any of this is necessarily intentional. I won't say that the film was written specifically to promote Nazism, just that it was written in a way that it could be used to that end, which points at a severely flawed execution when interpreted in its best light. However, I will also float out a conspiracy theory that a Disney executive may have issued a directive to not offend fascist investors, or the fascist market demographic, and that the act of pulling explicit condemnations of fascism and smoothing it over with generic bad guy stuff resulted in something that itself looks fascist. What counts as generic bad guy stuff is the same kind of crap floating around as Stan Lee utilized in the 60s to code his villains as evil. Stuff with its own hateful subtext that when presented in a context devoid of anti-fascism looks like a bunch of fascist dog whistles.
Hail, Disney!
I want to emphasize, the previous non-MCU film depicting Captain America's origin did not shy away from the Nazis. Nazis were not an impediment to getting parents on board with their children watching it. It's only the modern Disney version of Captain America's origin story that discards the Nazis and puts Hydra into place. Hydra can be Nazi, but in this depiction, it is only Nazi-like. The key difference is Disney. Disney can be a force for good, but often is not. Disney is bound up in American conservative sentiment, mistreats its workforce, and is invested in conservative politics. Though claims about being a Nazi sympathizer are a bit overblown, Uncle Walt was anti-Semitic enough to make the Big Bad Wolf dress up as a Jewish caricature in the 1933 Three Little Pigs short. Meet with Nazi director Leni Riefenstahl after Kristallnacht was known to the world, and hire Werner von Braun, inspiration for Arnim Zola, to host a television show about space exploration. He also union busted, reported his employees to the FBI under suspicion of being communists during McCarthyism, and had some black caricatures in his films. So, not the most progressive fellow. The Walt Disney Company is superficially clean and wholesome. It pioneered emotional labor with The Happiest Place on Earth, forcing employees to express happiness regardless of their inner lives to make customers' experiences pleasant, while overworking them and paying very little. Before Disney popularized it, this practice was not nearly as widespread as it is now. Disney also once owned a small town in Florida called Celebration and ruled it with an iron fist. Everything is forced to look like an ideal small town, at least in the eyes of a conservative uncle. No one is allowed to do anything that doesn't match up with this ideal, even commercial endeavors, and everyone must worship the mouse. There is a constant police presence, ready to issue fines for the slightest offense at the drop of a hat. Though Disney sold it in 2004, Celebration is still run the same way, and is effectively still a Disney product due to voting being restricted to landowners, meaning that wealthy Disney employees are the only ones allowed to enact change. It is a totalitarian nightmare to anyone who likes freedom, and can reasonably be called fascist. I'm harping on about Celebration because this is an example of what Disney culture is like. It is superficially clean and wholesome, with no room for variance, no room for diversity, no room for people to be themselves.
Hair Disney!
Though Nazi villains have been a thing in Disney entertainment since the war, as far as I can tell, it's only been as enemies of the Allies, not anything pertaining to the Holocaust. The closest thing I can think of to a Disney depiction of Nazi anti-Semitism is the 1943 propaganda short Chicken Little, in which a clever fox tricks a bunch of chickens into making themselves vulnerable to his predation by making up an absurd danger to scare them into acting foolishly. Though the version that currently exists shows that he got the idea from a book on psychology, the original version has him reading from Mein Kampf. By implication, Hitler made up an absurd danger, the Jews, to prey upon the German people who act foolishly in response and follow him. You might note that our sympathies are with the Nazis being exploited. This is a theme in common with the 1943 short Der Führer's Face, aka that one where Donald Duck is a Nazi. Our sympathies are with the Nazis oppressed under Hitler. No indication of the horrors of anti-Semitism, which absolutely was commonly known at that point. And Disney hasn't strayed from that framing through the years. No one at Disney thinks to question, hey, that might be a bad portrayal, eh? Disney has been very, very white and resisted change through the years, only starting to nod to racial inclusivity very recently, and mostly superficially. It wasn't until 2022 that Disney started dismantling Splash Mountain's racist Song of the South theme and replacing it with a more racially progressive Princess and the Frog theme. Even Princess and the Frog isn't so great, as it's one of the many films with a lead of color to hide their ethnicity behind an animal transformation. They sometimes pander to marginalized demographics, but always in an attempt to maximize profits regardless of ethics, going as far as to try to trademark the Mexican holiday Day of the Dead, and make a red-faced Maui bodysuit costume. For all Republicans may freak out about woke Disney, Disney is decades behind mainstream racial representation, and it just doesn't care. Aside from their role in educating the nation's children through their entertainment, Disney has been shown to be actively involved in politics. They have a considerable influence on copyright law, and in April 2022, donated over $100,000 to Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, a conservative politician. Though they've taken flack for this following DeSantis' institution of the Don't Say Gay bill, I think it's reasonable to speculate that this was not a one-off event. Disney has real political power, centered on conservatism. Did Disney order the production of Captain America: The First Avenger to not offend fascists? I don't know. I might be overthinking it. However, the film is so devoid of true anti-fascist sentiment that it could have been deliberate. Regardless of intent, that is a horrible flaw, and indicative of creative control that doesn't properly understand and appreciate the problems with Nazism. And that points at a deeper problem in the production and in Disney in general.
Hail Disney. That's more southern, isn't it?
Yeah, kind of.
Hail Disney.
Hail Disney.
Hail Disney. Oh,
Alright.
yeah. Hail Disney.
You too may be a big hero once you've learned to count backwards to zero. In German or English, I know how to count down. Und I'm learning Chinese, says Werner von Braun.